really excited today. We have Ngina Otiende, and she is with Intentional Today. And I have loved following her posts for a while and trying to connect with her. And I saw a post come out that said, An African American's Perspective of Shiny, Happy People. And I really felt that post deeply. And I was like, I would love to have a conversation about this post and hold space for these stories. And I just think that's really important. And I'm excited that she's here today. I'm a huge fan of what you're doing. And yeah, excited that you're here. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, so I am so glad to be here, Lauren. Joy, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of the conversation and hosting me here. So I'm just excited and I'm happy for that. Thank you for holding space. So my name is Ngina Otiende. I'm from originally born and raised in Kenya, but now I live in the United States. I'm a marriage coach and a blogger and a writer over at Intentional Today, where I help wives. I help them have address marriage problems with clarity and confidence. So for the longest time, for years, I'd been approaching marriage from the typical marriage problem point of view, and then about 2 years ago, I did a complete overhaul of how I do things. So I now talk about abuse as well, and just how a lot of some teachings have enabled abuse and immaturity in marriage, and we've just kind of normalized certain things. So that's what I talk about, and that's what I coach on. Well, I pull down all my resources and services. So yeah, but that's what I am about. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say that if you're working with marriages, I saw a statistic years ago that said about half of the people, or a little over half of the people who come to somebody for any kind of marriage therapy, counseling, coaching, whatever it may be, were experiencing domestic abuse. Although sometimes the counselors didn't recognize it. So I really appreciate that you have taken the time to learn and to actually pick up this platform because it's an epidemic, really. So,
Yeah, it is.
It
It
mhm.
is.
is. Yeah.
And we were just talking about that before we hopped on. And I shared a personal story from my life, and she connected with it. And I was going to share it really quickly. And then I would like to hear from her and her share why, before we get into the subject, why she got into this. And I said, Your story of the African American's perspective of shining at people was really touching to my life. One, because I saw that, I lived it. I worked for Bill for 3 years. I saw his racism personally and what you're saying. And I was like, that's so true. I never considered and contemplated that. But part of my heart that goes out to that is that I was in a white church with there's one black family there. And the one black family, the lady became my mentor. I asked her if she would mentor me. She's a very wise woman. And I began disclosing things in my marriage. And she began relating to me and believing me when nobody else did. And she related it to the suffering of racism and oppression. And that was why she understood and wept with me, prayed with me, told her husband. Her husband believed me, advocated for me, took it to the church. And the church wasn't taking it seriously, but she did. And it was because of the suffering and the oppression of racism that she understood it. And that really struck me deeply, is that she understood this and what that must have felt like, and the things that she was telling me about white culture and the abuse that's still prevalent in evangelical circles today. And it really impacted my life, because if she can believe me and feel my oppression, what must she feel? And I think that's an important question to ask ourselves. And so we were talking about that, and you were
Yeah.
explaining something similar. So I would love to hear your story on that.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we're talking about. Like every time you share that, like you just shared a couple of minutes back and now sharing again, it just hits again differently because it's not common. Let me not say rare, but it's not common for in white spaces, especially white church spaces, to listen and be aware about things like racism and patriarchy and how certain things have impacted people of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So for me, like for years, so I'm born and raised in Kenya, so I had no idea what racism was, like completely clueless. Like we were colonized by the British, but We did not. I was not aware of how racism looks like until I moved on. My husband and I moved to the U.S. years ago, and I didn't even when we were going through racist experiences here. We didn't know what it was. We didn't have the language for it. We heard other people talk about it, and we were like, oh no, we would constantly excuse or have just not know what's going on when things were happening to us. So it took a lot, years literally, to begin to say, no, no, like on that experience level, to say, no, this is not, we're not crazy. We're not imagining this. But in the white spaces, they thought we were. Like, no, you're just making stuff up. You are just, just lots of things were happening. So when I began to shift things and I began to listen to the women that were coming to me for coaching, marriage coaching, and like really like towards like that the things came to a head when I was shifting my entire ministry about 2 years ago, end of 2021, really. And and when I was talking to women, people in my life, and were discussing about what they were going through, they were going through. I was like, I get it. Like I get what you're going through. People think that that is normal. Nobody's listening to you. They see your experiences and they think there's nothing to that. Forget about it. That does not happen. You're imagining things. And so
Yes.
it was so when you see that silent, quiet, things are justified, minimized, shifted, blaming shifted. And I was like, my long explanation is I get where that woman was coming from, and you get it. Like you see somebody else going through those kinds of experiences, and they're being dismissed. You're like, yeah, I've been there. I've been there. I go through that, and yeah. So basically, yeah, that's my little experience there.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I love that we can come together to talk about these things and sometimes how they're interwoven. And empathy is huge, being able to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and to sit with their
Sure.
story and say, let me hear what that feels like. Let me understand that and let me know how I can be part of the solution in showing
Yeah.
empathy and being able to resolve the issue. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I would say
Yeah.
too, like racism is this, it's like coercive control and abuse on on a systemic or a whole cultural level. And so the same things
Yeah.
occur, the gaslighting. And so it's interesting that you recognize it because of what you experienced. Again, what
Yeah.
you were talking about, the gaslighting, no, that's not really happened, or make you confused
Yeah.
and make you feel like you're almost crazy. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
And
I've
like,
always yeah. Bottom
yeah.
line, biblically, it's called oppression, right? And so
Yeah.
it is definitely the same dynamic, and I don't think that people recognize that. So I'm really grateful that you were able to see it so clearly. I'm sad that you had to see it so clearly because of what you've been through, though, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's what you talk about, like crazy making and all that, and people want to rewrite history. Like
Yeah.
they tell you, oh no, what you experienced. Let me tell you a different perspective. Let me tell
Hmm.
you what happened to you. Let me tell you what's happening, and
Yeah.
they just don't want to believe that what you've experienced is real. That it's not just the culture; it's in the systems. And that's what it's kind of like the same way where it comes to church teachings. It's not just one or two people who might treat or might misunderstand or might not get things. It's the literal system.
Yeah.
It's in it that it's meant to oppress others and lift up others. Others are more superior than others. So, and that's what I was talking about in my blog post, the shiny white people, shiny people. They are shiny white people, like a lot. Everybody there was white. As far as I could see.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, so I guess that's already setting my system. But that's what I was saying. That it's I was talking about in the okay, I've lost my train of thought. But that's what I was saying, that it's in the system. Like it's not when I was talking about, survivors and what they have had to come through and the things that they're having to deconstruct and decolonize and all that. I was saying that to be able to be safe moving forward for others who don't look like you have to understand that the systems that have hurt you, wounded you, thrown you out, discarded you, killed you, have actually been the same systems that have oppressed people who are not in your space. And if you look around yourself and you're thinking, hey, we have been harmed, you have to think about others who are not in that space that have been harmed by those same systems. So for me, that was so basically just saying, Joy, that yeah, it's literally not just a few people. It's like in abuse, it's the systems. And unless the systems are, and they're functioning exactly the way they are meant to, because people say, oh, the church systems are broken. We need to fix what is broken, or the systems in the culture in the country are broken. They need to be fixed. It's like, no, they are not broken. They're functioning exactly the way they were created to. We say, the man leading, or, complementarianism, it needs to be fixed. No, it doesn't need to be fixed. It's functioning exactly the way it's meant to. It's meant to be torn down and replaced with something healthier. So it's not just a few people believing something wrong. It is the whole system
Yeah.
that the way it's been set, others are, it's the supremacist views, the way others are lower than others, and so that's what needs to be torn down and addressed and changed.
Yes, it goes from it's opposite of Jesus's kingdom, which is
Absolutely.
whoever wants to be greatest of all should be servant of all. And so it's this upside down. Jesus's kingdom is upside down, and we're acting just like the world. Power over, whoever's the strongest wins. And so I think it's just, yeah, you're right. It needs to be torn down. I mean, that's how his kingdom works. That when we finally humble ourselves before him, and that's what we
Mhm.
see with this, trying to work with this issue, that a lot of times they're just not willing to even humble themselves enough to learn. And
Yeah.
it still blows my mind that people in the church can continue in that kind of power dynamic and not even see that it's wrong. Because it's apparently like, do you not know what Jesus said about power? That this is not, we
Yeah.
don't wield our power over people. And yet it still happens in our
Yeah.
churches all the time. Yeah, that's good.
Yes. And I want to talk about that blog post and the things that you said. And I never saw it or thought about it from that perspective. And I'm just going out here and stating it, but there's so much racism that existed in Bill Gothard's teachings. And when you started saying that, I was like, I never considered how this was impacting the Black community, how this was impacting our culture and enforcing white supremacy, really, is what it was. There was a few Black ATI families. It was very rare. And and I remember my friend talking about this, is that sometimes in the church culture, we try to make Black people's culture be white people's culture. And we try to root it out and say, this is how you act, this is how you're to be. And we don't realize it because we view our culture as supreme. And that's how
Absolutely.
ATI was with the Black families that were involved, is that a lot of times it was more of a white family culture because that was what was viewed as supreme. And I never thought of what you were talking about with the teachings, and we'll get into that, the rock beat and the 2/4 beat. I remember that and telling the story about this.
Mhm.
Bill Goff told a story about this man who played Stevens Curtis Chapman over in Kenya, and the missionaries were playing it, and they came up to him and said, "Why are you calling in the demons? You're calling the demons with a 2/4 beat." Now, Bill Gothard made up stories and lied all the time. We know that. I know that.
Yeah.
So I never thought of that, what you're doing to
Yeah.
the culture. So let's talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we even talk about that, so and I made that clarity in my blog post, that when I say I'm talking, about the African American experience, shiny, having people African American experience, I want to be clear that I mean that literally, because I am both Kenyan and American. So I'm both African and American. Now, I'm not speaking for somebody who has ancestral rooting here in America. Like my mom is in Kenya. We are Kenyans, you know. So, but there are people who generations and generations, their ancestors were brought here by ship and they were kidnapped from Africa and they were kidnapped, brought here, and sold in chattel slavery. So I'm not speaking from that experience. For somebody and a Black American with that kind of rooting, so because I don't want to speak for them. And in the blog post, I gave a list of a lot of people who you people can follow and I encourage people to check out that post for that particular perspective. So this is my experience as a Kenyan American. And so back to the point, Lauren, and we talked about like the white culture was from what you could see, was basically put up as the epitome of everything. And everybody was supposed to bow, even the Black people were supposed to kind of bow to the white culture, that to be a Christian, to that they believe. It's called whiteness. So there is being white, and then there is whiteness. There are many other terminologies, but I want to just so that when I say whiteness,
Yes.
people of European descent don't feel like I'm attacking their skin color or I'm talking about somebody of their skin color. So whiteness and what I'm just reading so that I get it correct. So whiteness and a definition of it. So whiteness and white racialized identity refers to the way white people, their customs, their beliefs, their culture operate as a standard by which all other groups of people are measured by. So when I talk about whiteness, I'm not saying about white. Being white is just a phrase that refers to somebody's skin color. But whiteness is that entire collection of thoughts and beliefs and culture and viewpoints that's collected together and then it's made to be superior to others. So if you're supposed to be a Christian, you look more white. If there's a spectrum over here, this is other people and this is white. So the more you move in this direction, the more you're considered Christian, or the more you're considered civilized. For us who are in Africa, the more you're considered industrialized, the more, because that's one of the things that brought um, the old type of missionaries even today, because I was part of an evangelical fundamentalist missionary church
Mhm.
before I moved to the US. So the same mindset of we are here to upgrade you with our way of life. Your ways are savage, they are evil, they are demonic. Our ways are better, you know. So and as we know, even when it comes to domestic abuse, they some of the things that are preached from the pulpit of the beliefs, they're not always overt. It's the covert stuff that make women feel or spouses feel like this is my, this is my potion. I am oppressed, you know. So it's not that when it comes to whiteness, it's always something that is spoken. It's just that you feel to matter, to be seen, to be part of the collective. You have to lose yourself and be absorbed into this larger group. Look like them, speak like them, dress like them.
Mhm.
Um, I speak with a very good Kenyan accent, but the more I lose my accent, the more people say, hey, you're a part of us. The more I try, is the more they feel like, oh, okay. I open my mouth and speak, and people just lose interest. Or they're like, what are you saying? Where are you from? So it's like the more you move away from who you are, the more you find acceptance in this little space that is called whiteness, because the rest of the world is unlike that. Like there's a majority of the world that is not white. Yeah, so those are some of the things I was trying to and I don't know because I don't know if I'm addressing exactly, but I'm just speaking from my heart. Just the things when it comes to the superiority and the supremacist views that I observed as we were watching the things that were brought up as we were watching Shiny Happy People.
I think that people, um, don't like, a lot of times people, especially people who are very comfortable with their power, do not like anybody that's different. So, and I think that's some of it. People don't like change. They don't like being stretched a lot of times, and systems particularly don't like that.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I guess as you were saying, it's not just the system. The system's not just doing it to people who are different in skin color, because it's also happening to women quite a bit in these churches. So we've experienced it. You talk about supremacists, or um, basically this power over dynamic. It's power over. It has to do with race. It has to do with gender, and even I'm sure other things that just we do. It's just this superiority complex, and it's pride, which Jesus speaks against so much, that we're pride is well, scripture talks a lot about pride. It's basically the thing that pride comes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And so it's, I'm better than you, and we know that in God's kingdom there's no place for that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And the core driver, as in from what I've seen, and I think what I've observed is that and I think that's the case in all abuse and oppression, is this desire for power over people, misuse of power and control. Because that's what I saw in my missionary church in Kenya. Like the drivers where you're feeling you're more superior than other people is because you want to control the narrative. You want to keep, not only have power over people, but you want to keep it and you want to use it the way that you want to use it. So it's yes, there absolutely pride. I do find that desire to be God over people, to be the one who is worshipped, to have, and these are Christians, like
Right.
a lot of, like we're talking about in Christian circles, where people have just replaced themselves, they've just replaced Jesus with themselves, and they've decided like, this is what my culture, and our worldview should be everybody's worldview. The rest of the world's worldview. And Lauren, you're talking about how, like, that part of, the rock beat and all that. And I saw it when I saw that, as in one of the clips in the documentary. I was like, I mean, I was like, look at this. Like, they literally, the moment I saw the show and I saw it's just a lot of, one um, type of people represented. Like, it doesn't take much for people who look like me to know, oh, yeah, we were definitely not welcome there. But to see it in the actual curriculum, that it's written there that this rock beat came from Africa and West Africa, and it's used to do ABCD, get involved in demonic activities and all that. Um, for me, I knew it's just one of those tropes, because we've come across so many of them. We've heard them with just so many of them, where people just take things that are not just, they're not aware of them culturally. Like, for them, they're foreign, but the only way for the way they distill them, the way they look at them, they term them evil, they term them savage, they term them unchristian, simply because they're unfamiliar to them. And again, it's that view of like, my view is supreme. I, they're saying they're talking about God, but the problem is the God they're talking about is health, and not the real message of Jesus Christ that they are purporting to be, bring it to these other cultures. And, there's a whole lot of conversations around whether we actually needed Jesus to be brought by Western missionaries, because there's somebody from Egypt in the Bible, not from Egypt, from Ethiopia in the Bible, who came back on our, like, Christianity was already there. So there's a whole lot of conversations around that. But yeah, yeah.
Wow. And I'm heartbroken when you tell me all those things, because there's 3.5 million people into the seminar, and 20,000 families enrolled in this. And I never thought about the impact of that. Like I'm saying, I probably met out of the 20,000 families, maybe 3 Black families. I worked for Bill for 3 years. I never saw a Black girl be asked to come and work on staff. I've never seen it, never heard of it. I never thought of the white supremacy culture that he was promoting and pushing out the rock beat as African calling in demons, how he was causing us to subtly view the African culture and their way of worship. And just it's enforcing a supremacy view. And I'm sorry
Mhm.
for that. That breaks my heart to think about and to say, yes, that's true. That's what I saw. And I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that this is a place where you're talking about this, because the experience I've had, even in that's why I left the evangelical spaces way before, years ago, where I wasn't safe anymore. We were not safe to talk about your experience as a Black person in America. So, because the evangelical spaces are predominantly white, even those that are not still have that racialized identity, because again, evangelicalism by and far is, and Protestantism has a lot of, white views and white way of looking at things. So there isn't really much space for these discussions at all. Like, I haven't found anywhere where I can talk about this without triggering a massive backlash. So it's we haven't felt, and again, I'm talking about as a Kenyan American. So if you talk to a Black person who was born and raised here, for them to talk about some do not even want to talk about their experiences with people who don't look like them, because it's not safe. Your body does not feel safe. Nothing has been safe for you. So I do appreciate this conversation, because we haven't had this like public forum conversation, because we have been put down. Anytime I've tried to bring it up, uh, slammed down, shut hard, and by leadership sometimes. Um, so anyway,
Well, I want to give you hope on that. So I've been doing this work, domestic violence work, since 1997. So we're looking at about 26 years now. And when I've tried to have the conversation about domestic abuse, they shut me down. It's the same thing. And so what I have found just in the last 5 years, um, they're starting to listen. The churches are starting to listen. We go into evangelical churches. I I consider myself evangelical in that, Jesus is the way and the truth and the life, and that we believe in the the authority of Scripture. But you're right; they've done a lot of damage. A lot of the theology that's come out of our churches has been very harmful, not just to everybody. I mean, it's been harmful to women, particularly in the way that they have interpreted certain scriptures and passages that I don't believe reflect God's heart. Anytime you're telling somebody they have the right to lord it over somebody else, that is just not Jesus's way. But as you were talking, and you're talking about the experience and this superiority complex, I thought, isn't that exactly what Jesus had to deal with the religious leaders? Like our God came down and he experienced that. These prideful Pharisees who thought their way was the only way, who thought that they had the market on truth, and that because Jesus shook it up a little bit and he challenged them, they shut him down. So we have a God who understands, and but he also is one that listens, and he wants us as his children to listen. If somebody is saying they're hurt, you don't just ignore it. You don't sweep it aside and just make excuses. But that's what's happened to the the black races, or the darker skinned people. That didn't come out very well, but people of color. My brain is not working very well today. It's happened to women, and it's happened to other people with different, who are different, and they don't fit into the mold of what our churches are, how they present. So um, But I'm so grateful that we have a God who came down and experienced exactly what we're talking about here, that he was abused and he was oppressed himself. So it is a beautiful thing. So
Yeah, and Joy, yeah, I'm just grateful. One of the things that I'm super grateful for, in decolonizing things and deconstructing is understanding that the Jesus that has been introduced to me, is not the true Jesus. And
yes,
so that to begin to actually start figuring out having a relationship with the true God, and having him being open and kind and calm to my questions and my grief has been a game changer. Now, the thing about racism and otherism here in America specifically is, and the reason, I get emotional is it has been this country, and I know that people of European descent don't like to hear some things that we have to say, people who look like me have to say. But this country the United States was established on the back of annihilating, killing, genocide of the indigenous people in this country. It was also established on the backs of enslaved Africans. So, yes, things have shifted. People are no longer owned by people legally. However, it's been hundreds of years. Jim Crow and segregation just stopped being law like some 60 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, but that doesn't mean things are no longer.
right.
People are still not culturally, economically, and the justice system. That things might look better, but they are not better.
No,
So while I do know and appreciate that things have shifted and are shifting, we have so much to go.
Oh
Because
yeah,
until there's an acceptance that something needs to change,
absolutely.
things will not change.
Right.
So and that's the thing. Yeah, there's domestic abuse and things are slowly changing. But the thing is, some things have been around for a really, really long
yes,
time,
Oh, I totally
and
agree. And I'm not
they've been
trying to say yes.
systemic,
I'm not trying
you
to say
know.
I'm just saying there is hope because I thought I would never see the day we're seeing what we're seeing, but it doesn't mean that the majority of people are getting it either. And I
Sure.
know this is way more system. Well, it's all very systemic, and but yes, and I have seen though. I mean, even here, we have a pretty well-known evangelical church who he started a lot of conversations on race, and he lost a lot of members over it, but they were persistent with it. So I'm seeing little sparks here and there, and I think that's how it starts. We can't just turn the tide suddenly, but um, I have hope because I'm seeing the little sparks, more sparks for us, and I feel like we're ahead of that. We have one of the ladies on our staff. She says to us, like she says, although the black church is 20 years behind the white church on certain things, and it's because I think the oppression that's come down and having to be in a defense mode for so long. It's hard to be um, proactive
yeah,
about taking care of problems when you've been defending yourself and you've been trying living with the things that you're talking about, like just not even being able to discuss things because you have this fear. How is this gonna be received? And so I get it. I think we got a long, long, long way to go. We know that.
and I think it's very
Yeah.
systemic too in our economy. I was talking to her about that. Even in our economy, it's still there's a lot of oppression towards erase. There just is, and she was saying they're still in survival mode, so many times trying to survive, and I think that's where we have to sit and listen and take ourselves out of the equation, and we have to say, especially us who survived domestic abuse, we can understand oppression. And
Yeah.
it's in that moment when you look at that and you say, oh, but it's not a problem, I don't have that. That's like us saying when other people say, oh, well, domestic abuse doesn't exist here. We don't have a problem with it. Sit and
Yeah.
listen because maybe
Yeah.
it does. Maybe
Yeah.
it is there. And if they're saying, I'm feeling oppressed, my body is saying this, and I sense this, can we stop for a moment and listen and say, yes, how can I make a safe place for you to feel these things, acknowledge these things, and what role have I played in that? Because the role I
Yeah.
played in that needs to stop. We are called to protect the oppressed. That includes everybody, those who feel oppressed due to color of their skin and those who are oppressed due to domestic violence. Oppression exists and we have to sit and acknowledge it and
Yeah.
say, tell me because I don't understand. That's what Jesus did. He didn't, well, he
Yeah.
didn't understand, but he sat and listened. So can we sit and listen and say, I'm here. I want to hear. How can we?
Yeah.
How is it still playing a role? How can we make a difference?
And
Yeah.
don't minimize it like you were talking about at the beginning. And I think that's what's been happen has been happening in all oppression for years. They minimize it. No, that's not what happened to you. They try to redefine your experience, and that is when I believe it moves over to the realm of abusive, when you're telling people their own experience rather than listening. So that was good, Lauren. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Lauren, you said something about, about listening and about holding space. And that's one of the things I was talking about in the post as well, is if you're coming out of Gothardism and evangelicalism and you're deconstructing your faith, you're re-inspecting your beliefs around what you believe about God, about, what you were taught, and you come from a place that is very white, like Gothard was white, evangelicalism is you're coming from a white space, and then you deconstruct and you believe you're healing and you're healthy and you're moving on. If you do not deconstruct or decolonize your faith, you will go ahead with the same mindset of the things that you were taught, either directly or indirectly. You will move on with the same things in the survivor spaces, in the healing spaces, and you're going to be unsafe for those who don't look like you. And whenever I say that, I receive emails and comments and, like, angry European people of descent, white people, write to me and they tell me all sorts of things. And I'm just gonna keep saying it. If you don't heal everything, you're gonna take that stuff. Even if your community feels safe for most people who look like you, it would feel safe for people who look like us. Like when I was watching people talk about a lot of people talking about shiny white people and what happened, and they would list the sins of Gothard, of evangelicalism. And I think I only saw one post, somebody talking about racism, and it was just like comment and gone. And I'm like, people, you're not talking about everything, so everybody will not feel welcome. And when I talk about it, people feel so offended because they feel like I'm saying they are racist or I'm calling them something they're not. I'm just saying, look, you are in this place for so long. You are being taught stuff about us that isn't
Yes.
true. Your
Yes.
organization is predominantly white, led by a white racist man.
Yes.
And you're saying, like, I know the rest of the world. You're going to have some blind spots and some blinders. And so
Yes.
you're going to take those same things into your spaces so that people who don't look like you, when they say, hey, I was hurt in this way. So other trauma, your trauma and other things are going to be welcome, but racial trauma is not going to be welcome there. And that's what I was saying, that we have to decolonize our faith. Whether you're white, person of color, you have to look at, okay, what is white beliefs in this state of mind? What is just a white cultural outward way of belief, viewpoints that
Mhm.
are not really Jesus? They're
Yes.
just a supremacist way of looking at things. And so that's what I was saying, that we have, and I'm so grateful for you guys for creating a space to talk about this. That it's just important, if you're going to create healing spaces, they have to be safe for everybody, not
Yes.
just for people who look certain way on their skin. And people have to understand that if we are fleeing evangelicalism because of racism and otherism, and those who are healing and living with us who don't look like us
Mhm.
still doubt us, like
Mhm.
I'm struggling to see Jesus,
Yeah.
Yes.
and many like me are struggling to see
Well,
Jesus.
yeah. Amen. And
Yeah.
that's the thing that to me has been most tragic in even doing this ministry. So many of the women that have come through abuse, they're leaving the church. Their children are leaving the church. In fact, Dan Beck, who is our church partnership um, program coordinator, says that he was seeing something that just hundreds of thousands of people have left the church, the evangelical church in the United States. So we've got a problem if that many people are leaving and they don't feel comfortable. They feel less than because of the doctrines of the church, and that's a problem. I totally agree. So we are sorry for your
Yes.
experience in the church. I wish our churches really, I think that if we really had a passion for Jesus's gospel, his evangelion, which is what the evangelical church is based on, it means good news. And it hasn't been good news for a lot of us because of the way certain passages were interpreted, or things like what happened with Bill Gothard, where he basically made up his own stuff. He just made up stories that hurt, caused harm. And so we see that people will look and they'll try to find scriptures to back up their oppressive beliefs.
Yeah.
Yes, and I just want to say, as somebody that has lived through Bill Gothard's teachings and been there, what you're saying is true. And I think that, and I'll send this to those that I know that have been through ATNAOP, we need to sit with that and we need to say, in what ways were we impacted by this to be white supremacists in our mind or to be judgmental, because it's there, it was taught, it's brainwashed, it's ingrained in. And we can't say, well, hey, that didn't happen to us. And I see a comment saying somebody, I'm sorry, I'm just going to call it out, was attacked by black kids. So she says she doesn't judge the whole black race, but that's a different situation. You didn't grow up under oppression. And that's where we have to sit and we have to listen to the whole story and we have to hear it all and say, yes, it's there. It was there in the organization. It's impacted them. It's different when you go out and you say, hey, I was attacked by this color, or I experienced this, but you don't have the whole background of that situation of what they've gone through and what they have been through and experienced it in the same way because you have a different skin color. And that's something we have to sit with and consider. And I would love to hear your perspective on ways that this still exists in the church, in ways that we still are um, showing areas of racism, and that ways that we should, if we're going to deconstruct this and deconstruct the ways that submission was mishandled against us, the ways that authority was mishandled against us, maybe we need to sit down and deconstruct too the ways that we took on views that were racist and wrong and judgmental, and we need to apologize for those things, and we need to say, hey, help me do better, because I don't want that in my life. I want to show Jesus, because like I said, that's who showed Jesus to me. So I want to show Jesus as well. And I just want to say thank you and sorry. And also at the same time, I would love to hear you speak on that and share ways that you feel we still need to deconstruct these things.
Yeah, yeah, and to that comment, if I understand correctly, it's something that has come through about, was it someone saying that they have been attacked by a black person or
Yes.
something like that? I don't know. And that's something that I hear often,
Yeah.
that you share a pain. And again, I don't have a sense of rooting here, but a lot of African Americans will tell you, like, they share something they've experienced, and somebody will say, oh, but a black person did this to me, as if that other person's experience just kind of, they're looking for a way to kind of slash your own systemic issues with just that one experience. So just saying that, I've been attacked by a black person or a black kid does not mean that racism doesn't exist.
Yes.
You can take, and there are a lot of white people who also do violence on white bodies and black bodies. So anyway, this is there's so many counters to when you talk about your experiences and your pain that are unique to your people group, and people just come up, and I'm not, to be honest, I'm not expecting any less. Because that's typically what happens. There are always people who will not listen, who will not sit and hold space and listen because they are on defense mode, because there are things that are happening within them that will not allow them to acknowledge what others are going through. They will center themselves in
Yeah.
other people's stories, and we cannot change that mindset. Like the ability to like just sit and listen, they don't have that. It's always like, but you share something, and then they take it right back, and now it's about themselves, their view, and what they think.
Hmm.
So if I'm going to speak about what can change, again, I'm speaking as a Kenyan who experienced, again, I was years in in an evangelical church, missionary church, white, an American couple who established a church in my country, and I was part of that for years since I was a young adult till the time that I moved to the United States. And I don't even know where I would start. It's gonna sound radical, but I would say pack your bags and leave us alone. That's gonna sound radical to people. Like the best thing you can do is stop it. Um, just stop bringing your culture on other people's cultures and turning them. That's the thing about taking your things into other people's worlds, is that some of the challenges that you have, some of the problems with your theology and all that, you'll go to other cultures that have their own unique issues. All cultures do. But
Hmm.
then you go to these other cultures, maybe it's a developing country, maybe it's a country that's even a community here that is under resourced to deal with the vulnerable, like women and children in the society. So you go to those cultures and you hear you're taking patriarchy, or you're taking whatever it is, your supremacist views about whiteness into these cultures. And what you take is going to get mixed up with what is there. And it will be so hard to change people's minds. Like I see so much deconstruction happening in the US, and people just deconstructing everything. Is like, this was not of God, this is of God. And then, but the problem is the missionaries that were sent, the gospel that has been sent to other parts of the world by the American church, is still that old toxic thing, because they are being mentored, they are being counseled, they are learning from the pastors here, from the books here, from the seminaries here in the US, and they are the doctrine or the theology being taught. Some of it lines up perfectly with our cultural beliefs. Like patriarchy is huge in my culture, and then you bring a version of Jesus that installs men as the leaders. So men just love it in the church. So you're bringing somebody, people are just beginning to follow Jesus, and they're like, oh, yeah, I love this God of yours because he agrees with me. I am the head. So that means I can do whatever I want, and that's what God says I should be. So while the American church is deconstructing some of it, I don't know what it's gonna take for that same deconstruction to get to my culture. Because I've tried, we have some grassroots things, and it is difficult. It is so hard to change people's minds because they are currently being shaped by American Christianity and Western Christianity. And
Hmm.
so for me, a lot of things, it's like making the gospel, the American version anyway, Western version of Christianity anyway, has made things worse for people who look like me, either here or out there. Because It's not Jesus being brought, it's not Jesus being introduced. It
Mhm.
is supremacists, it's systems of oppression and abuse, taking them to places that have oppression and abuse. And when I come from that culture and come to the US and I start saying, stop it, missionaries, don't, if you cannot go with Jesus and partner with people like they are individuals made in the image of God. Don't go. In fact, stop sending missionaries to Africa and other places. Do partnerships. Don't go with the gospel. We know Jesus. So I get so like people look at it and they're like, what are you talking about? But it's like you come here and tell them this is the harm that has been done by the missionaries you sent. And it's so hard because the structures of power and abuse and control are hard to break. But for me, back to the question, like, what can people do is I would say stop it, but it's the easiest thing, stop it. But there are people who are actually doing this, who offer trainings, who offer like an actual way the church can begin to listen to people who don't look like them. And like their books, there's like Be the Bridge by Latasha Morrison. They work with churches and in the racial and being a bridge, so to speak. And I have a list of them again in the blog post where people can learn, people can grow, and they can decolonize. But the easiest thing for me, as I was thinking about this, like from the beginning, even before the last couple of years, is like if you want your church to to be welcoming to everybody, don't just say we welcome everybody. Let it be seen that you do.
Mhm.
That means top leadership has to look like the kind of people you want to be in church. Don't say, oh, we welcome everybody. And then you just think we're going to have one person, a worship leader here, and another person. No, let there be who, like if I come to your bio page of our staff, is everybody white? Or
Mhm.
do you have one token black person and you're like, oh, we're good now? Let people's voices be heard and not just within the congregation, but positions of power. And not people who will just repeat what you think, but actually people who are like me who do not agree with you. You can work together, but they are people who are willing to say, no, this hurts, as opposed to, well, yeah, and like this, and again, I don't have ancestral ruling here, but I'm just saying that people who actually come in with their own full image of God the way they are, not ashamed, not to be like, okay, I take up my space. I don't come here to conform, to be like the majority. If I can be welcomed the way I am, that's the kind of people you want to connect with. People that will come into your space and be themselves without being bowing to that pressure of like, I have to be like you. And the thing is, a lot of these supremacist sort of churches want people who will be exactly like them. Whether it's an indigenous person or a person of color or a black person, they'll be like, okay, we're going to find us a person of color who's exactly like us. And then they'll be like, okay, we are diverse. Bye bye. It's like, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. You have to find people who do not agree with you, who are going to speak the truth about the systems of oppression that have been in place for centuries, and be willing to work together, to willing to bring trainers and to learn. But then everything begins in the heart of leadership. So unless there is a shift in the heart of people where they actually listen, Lauren, as you're saying, and just learn, and not just be willing to do the one thing and we are done. Oh, we did it and we're done. Okay. Now they can come in. If they don't want to come through the doors, it's up to them, but we did our part. No, it's an ongoing thing
Yeah. I will
that
say
has to be done.
what you're saying resounds with me. In seminary, and I've been out for 10 years. And near the end, books were starting to come through the seminaries about how we have imposed our culture on other people and how we have read the Bible with a Western mindset that doesn't even fit what Scripture has to say. So I see this as happening. You're not saying we don't wish we had heard the gospel of Jesus. You're saying we wish that they hadn't come, and it was like it was presented in an oppressive way. I mean, which does more damage than good, just like it has happened for so many women. But um, yeah, I think that the church, at least, again, I feel like I am seeing some sparks, and it's going to take a long time. I'm not saying that we are anywhere close to where we need to be, but the fact that we have imposed this not just, it's not just racist, it's oppressive, it's we are superior. Again, that pride that Jesus saw with the Pharisees, that we impose ourselves, our beliefs, and we're not willing to listen, to look at what those systems are doing to people, then that it doesn't lead to anything good. But I find
Yeah.
hope. I find hope in the fact that some people are starting to listen. We're here listening today. We're trying to, we want to, we don't want to minimize anything that has harmed people. Any kind of oppression should never be minimized. And so that's where I hope that, this is just the beginning of a conversation. We want to listen well, and we want to make sure that we are giving people not only space, but we are giving them honor, respecting people, not just coming and saying, hey, we do want you to come and be our token person, black person for this interview or whatever, so we can have you out there as an example of what we're doing right. That's not what it's about. It's really listening. It's really trying to make a difference. And so, I mean, and I know that's even for us. Um, we have very much tried to be more diverse from the beginning. We have been. In fact, at one point, I had equal numbers, like the black and white people on my board. It changed, like it's fluctuated over the years. But I feel like it's difficult for us, even as white, mostly white leadership run organization. I want to be more diverse, and sometimes it's just hard for us to find the people, that want to come in. So these are conversations we need to keep having, is how can we work together more. So and so this is something we want to keep the lines of communication open and talk about that more. We've had reached out to other organizations to talk about how we can achieve that kind of what God's kingdom really looks like, because God's kingdom has
Mhm.
no color, right? It's just we are, in Christ. There's um, no color of skin. There's no gender. There's no male nor female, and there's no Jew or Gentile, is what it says, I think, in Galatians. So we are sisters and brothers, and we all got our own hurts that we carry, but the Lord is the healer. And my prayer is that, this conversation it's the beginning of some healing, even just in our little world here, that we are willing to stop and do what Lauren was saying and really listening to one another, and honoring one another. Just because maybe we don't see eye to eye on everything, but that traditionally in our churches, if we didn't see eye to eye with people, then we just started judging, shut them out, and that's never going to achieve what God wants for us. Jesus stopped and listened to people. He listened to the woman at the well, who I imagine was very ostracized by her community. She'd been married 5 times and was living with somebody. So, in religious terms, they would have shunned her and not wanted to have anything to do with her. But he went out of his way to find her. And that's what we need to do, is like find each other, find the ones who have experienced this oppression and this being marginalized. Um, so yeah, thank you really so much for sharing those heart concerns. And again, we know it's painful. A lot of us, most of the people who are watching this, have been through oppression, experienced oppression in their marriages or in their relationships. Um, and yet maybe even some of us could just sit here and listen. Well, that's not the same. We don't want to compare our experiences to one another either. because when we start doing that, then we're minimizing your experience because mine was worse. And that's one of the things we try to teach our advocates is like we don't compare stories. And so again, I'm just grateful for you sharing. It's helpful to me. I feel stretched, stretched some. We have actually kind of gone over our time. I think we started late, Lauren. If you want to finish up, I got another meeting I've got to get on. I can always hop off. But
Okay. Yes.
thoughts you got? Yeah,
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, did you have anything else you wanted to bring up? I mean, I'll stay on for another few minutes, but then I'll have to get off. But anyway, I
Okay.
just
Yeah.
want to say thank you for this conversation. I have been stretched to so many times. It's like you said, we don't want to hear people who don't agree with us or that will challenge us in what we do. And so, I would say, just in the last 5 years, I've found myself stretched and stretched and stretched again in multiple ways. And so, um, I hope that our listeners, when you listen to this, you don't automatically put up your defenses. I hope that you will listen and understand that when people are talking about their pain, we need to be still and listen because that's what our Lord did. That's what our God does. And so we don't want to minimize their experience. We don't want to attack it automatically. We don't want to attack it ever. What am I saying? But anyway, we want to listen with an open mind and heart. And so, because it's a real experience for people, and I totally agree. I mean, I have seen it, and I even I think about here, just even in our country. I was a history minor, and I had to learn the the United States versus the Native Americans. And we had, I don't know how many treaties with the Native Americans. There was probably 30 or 40 of them. And guess who broke every single treaty? It was the United States. It was not the Native Americans. And so to me, that's always been just so bothersome. And so are we willing to look at what we've done, our part in it? It always, when I learned that, I had to memorize every act that there was between the United States and the American Indian. And so, they called it American Indian policy back in those days when I was there. But and I was just, I couldn't believe it. I was just dumbfounded. How could our country be that way? But we have been, because power and control wins the day. And power and control in relationships, power and control over race, it happens to be it runs our systems. And I know that's what you're saying. And what we're trying to say is, and that Bill Gothard certainly created a system all of his own, and it had a huge impact on our churches. So, I
Yeah.
think, but I'm going to be quiet and let Lauren wrap it up. So,
Well, I do have a few things to say, and
okay.
I would love to hear you. I don't want to be the final word here. I would love for you to close that out, but um, I think that sometimes I know for me, and I look at the situation, and I think of people when I first started talking about domestic violence, they pushed back on me, and they pushed back, and they said, "No, it's not real. No, it's not really that issue. No, it's not happened." But the lady who was of color stood with me and believed me. And I have not talked to very many Black people when you sit and listen to their stories who will tell you that racism doesn't exist, because it does. And you may say, "Oh, well, Black people can racist too." Well, would you like me to come and tell you my story of domestic violence? And you say, "Well, women can be abusive too." That doesn't relieve my pain. I'm still in oppression. Abuse is still happening. Yes, there is women out there who are very abusive to their husbands. That's true. But it doesn't stop my work and what I believe in protecting women who are vulnerable and oppressed. And when we hear things are really hard, it's our defense mechanisms want to go up because we don't want to sit with it, because sitting with it is hard and painful to say, maybe I played a part in this and maybe I believed these things. But we have to. That's the only way change will happen, is if we're willing to sit and we're willing to listen and say, hey, how can I hold space here? How can I change and make a difference here? Like you're saying, accept people as they are. I haven't met many Black people at all that would tell you this doesn't exist. And we can't deny it by saying, well, I've met a Black person that's abusive. Yeah, I've met white women that abuse their husbands. That doesn't mean that I stop advocating for women who are abused by their husbands, because their pain is still real just because somebody else was abusive. And I'm sorry that somebody else experienced that. If a man that experienced a woman that was abusive, my heart still goes out to you just the same. But we have to stop. We have to listen, and we have to say what is our part in that. Because like I'm saying, I built off in this culture. I grew up in it. I saw it. It's there. The racism was, white supremacy was very much there. If you want to look at it as a whole. So I appreciate you sharing that today, and I hold space for you. And I say, I'm
Thank you.
sorry for what you and others have endured, because it's not right. It's not Jesus's heart. And those who've been oppressed of all people should know how much horrible it feels
Yeah.
when those who profess the name of God dismiss you and say that doesn't exist, and stand behind you, and don't, it just ignore you and pretend like it doesn't exist, because it doesn't impact and affect their lives, because they're on top. So we have to sit and we have to say, hey, I want to show Jesus. I want to listen. I want to feel that, because I know what it feels like to be abused and oppressed. And to have those who profess the name of God say, I'm not going to listen because it doesn't impact my life. And
Yeah.
sometimes you have to hear
Yeah.
hard stories.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you so much. If I can say just, I know you're saying we're over time, but
You're
if I
fine.
could just say that what we must do, what white people must do is get educated. Like
Mhm.
I know, like Joy was saying that, there's a automatic defense system that goes up. Human beings, when we are confronted with stuff that feel personal, there's something, a switch that tends to go on, and you go on defense mode, or something doesn't sit with you. So it's very hard to sit in someone else's story and listen to it from their perspective when you have that alarm going off in your head. But the thing is that thinking like this is personal, it didn't happen and all that, but the thing that happens is if you, with compassion and gentleness, and with a mind of like, I'm just exploring, I'm just curious, like you don't even have to be sold to the whole story. Just be curious and ask Jesus to help you to be curious about other people's experiences, people of color experiences. And the most powerful thing that you can do is to go to the resources that hopefully you can link the blog posts that I've linked, or other places that and begin to learn things from their point of view without feeling like now I have to change everything I believe. Just be curious, just compassionate curiosity, awareness. Start to listen and let that information, listen to the history, listen to how it is in the systems, listen to their experiences, but also the history of it. Sometimes we just react like what Joy you're saying, with pride, all that. The pride is a driver, so it's important to start to think like, why are we proud? What is that? What is under the surface of the pride? What is driving this supremacist thinking? And then as a white person, begin to understand how, as a people group, you need to address it from yourself. And then that's how now you bear the fruit of love and understanding and compassion to other people, because you're changing from within. But it starts from like, feel your own emotions, but as well as share the emotions of others and their experiences through educating yourself. So that one of the most important thing you can do is listen to Black educators, to their history. They're online, like it's online. Buy the books, buy the podcast, listen to things that you haven't been listening to with an open mind. You don't have to start with like, I have to change everything I believe. But the same way we go to school to learn, like you don't know everything, but you're open to go and learn what is going on. So just begin to learn and begin to understand what is going on, or what has gone on generationally forever, and then that can birth something in you that helps you begin to shift your perspective. So that when somebody else says, hey, I was attacked by a Black person, you're able to see right through that and know that that has been used to justify and diminish. Like it's literally double. But if you're not educated, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's a good point. But if you have some education, if you're learning and exposing yourself to new information and knowledge, you'll be like, oh, I see through that. I see through that. So again, information is good. Please, it is something. It's just don't allow. Just go and study the real history. look at what people who don't look like you are talking about and begin to educate yourself and just ask God to give you that curious, compassionate curiosity to just learn what is going on. Even if at first you're thinking, I am right. But what if you can just, with your rightness, begin to kind of like, okay, let me see what they are saying, not to push them down, but to begin to get widen your scope
Mhm.
Yeah.
of, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. We have to be open and also prayerfully listen. Prayerfully listen. Lord, is there some truth in this that I need to look at in myself?
Mhm.
And I think the woman that talked about being attacked, she said it did not um, taint her view of the entire race, and so that I guess we can all look at that. She was not. I don't think she was trying to use it as something against, but I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, so, but that we are prayerfully listening, because that's what I do when I listen to things and somebody, I get challenged a lot. I mean, this is a ministry where, we had a staff retreat this week, and part of what some of my employees were saying things about, the way that I had taught things. I don't think they were hearing what I was saying. And I realized I got to go back and change the way I'm saying things because it's not reaching people. So, whatever it may be, there's a communication misfire or something like that. And I just think that we have to be willing to be what God wants us to be instead of automatically getting up upset. We have to say, well, is there any truth in this? Are we willing to look at ourselves, to humbly look at ourselves and say, what is true here, and what do I need to do, Lord, to please you and to follow your great commandment, to love you with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love my neighbor as myself. And so I think that would be, if we can do that, then we've started, this will, man, if the church could do that, the worldwide church could do that, there would be no abuse. There would be none of this. And we're just, we live in a broken world, and one day we will see face to face, and none of this awful stuff will exist. And until that day, we try to we try to make a difference. We try to be the difference. And so we appreciate you, Ngina, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure this is not the last conversation we'll have. Uh,
Yes, I want to have you back and
Yeah.
talk about more things. That you have such, anybody who's not familiar with her, you can find her on Intentional Today. Has wonderful posts. I love her stuff. Even sharing about marriage and advocating for oppression, and it's very articulate and very well said. And I appreciate
Thank
your
you.
voice very much in this community. So I am looking
Thank
forward to
you.
some more conversations about domestic abuse. So I appreciate hearing
Mhm.
your heart and your story today. And thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so, so much for having me here today and for holding space for me and those who look like me and just having this conversation. It is, again, I will say it is not common to have these conversations in public in this way. At least my experience hasn't been. So I am just so grateful and that you guys have created this space to have these conversations and for having me, specifically for inviting me to sit with you guys and just have this conversations with you. So thank you for that. Really appreciate that.
Thank
Thank you.
you. We're
Well,
grateful.
yeah, we're grateful we'll have you back soon. So it'll be great.
I'm looking forward. Looking forward.
Well, y'all have a wonderful day. Thank you for everybody who listened. Thank you for everybody who held space today. And hopefully excited that more conversations can come of this. So thank you.
Amen.
Thank you.